Lexophiles, bibliophiles, and quillophiles. Welcome back to Ink, Coffee, and Regrets. I've been thinking about the topic of today's show since before there was an Ink, Coffee, and Regrets podcast. Because to me, at least to me, it represents a point of disappointment and possibly failure, both in the fact that it's happening and the fact that we're letting it happen. Today we're talking about something that feels almost rebellious in 2026, and that's reading. Yes, I'm talking about that ancient ritual where you, or at least someone who looks remarkably like you, stare at squiggly lines and symbols on a piece of paper, and you use your brain to imagine and magically turn all that stuff into ideas. Not so much of that, but in doing so, you, once again, you, have to let your brain imagine and visualize what's happening in those words when they become put together to form paragraphs, chapters, and eventually books. Now, before anybody panics, no, this is not going to be one of those kids these days rants where I'm sitting on the porch waving my fist. This is more of a humans these days rant, backed by data, science, and a dash of snark. Though I may tell you to get off my yard if I see you walking on it with your dog and leaving a present for me. You see, I think we're losing the understanding that reading isn't just a hobby or a way to kill time, or something that you have to do because there's someone holding a failing grade over your head if you don't. But it's a cognitive workout, a mental spa day, and occasionally a cheap form of therapy, a way to get away from what's going on around you, but at a very low cost. And yet fewer and fewer people are doing it. And when I actually started doing the research for the data for this episode, I was surprised at exactly how bad the numbers were. I had no idea that they were quite as bad as they are, and how few people are actually picking up and reading books these days. So, are we actually reading less? Let's start with the uncomfortable truth, that reading for pleasure is in decline. I think, though, that if you really think about it, it's pretty obvious. As an example, I can recall a time when you could go out to a place like a park and see people sitting around reading books and newspapers. Yes, they might also be with their family and a pet and doing other things, but a majority of them had a book in their hand or a paper in their hand or a magazine. But now you go to those same places and you see people with their faces buried in phones, tablets, or laptops. And if you happen to breeze by them, they're probably watching things like TikTok or Instagram or whatever. To be fair, I'm not saying that this is bad, but let's look at the numbers real quick. According to the National Endowment for the Arts, they reported that in 2022, only 48.5% of adults reported reading at least one book in that year. That's down from 52.7% 5 years earlier, with fiction reading hitting its lowest point in over 30 years. Among 13-year-olds, daily reading for fun has dropped from 27% in 2012 to just 14% in 2023. That's the lowest since the mid-'80s. 9-year-olds aren't doing much better. Only 39% read for fun almost every day in 2022, down from 53% a decade earlier. The United States has one of the highest literacy rates in the world, around 99%, probably a few points higher than that. But the real telling factor is countries that have the same or better literacy rates, like Finland, Norway, and Germany, read far more for pleasure than do people here in the United States. So the issue isn't whether Americans can read, it's whether we choose to. So yes, the numbers are bleak, but this isn't a guilt trip. It's a reminder that reading is becoming a rarer and rarer habit, which makes it more valuable. I say it's not a guilt trip, but that's sort of subjective when you think about it, and think about the fact that good reading habits start at home. And who has control over what happens there? Well, if you're a parent, then you need only look in the mirror to find the culprit. Yes, teachers play a part, but your teacher is not the person that's responsible for creating good habits for your child. They have enough to do to teach them. Your job is to make sure that they keep learning. I am not without guilt. I have tried hard, though certainly not hard enough, to get my son to read for pleasure. But I have failed, and I worry that this will be a hardship for him later in life. I might be wrong. We'll have to see. But when you think about it, and this is another one of my fun analogies, I'll throw them all over the place, so just get with it. If reading were a gym membership, half the country would be paying for it and never showing up. So why do books actually still matter? Why does reading actually still matter? Reading an actual physical book in spite of what others may think or say, is still something that matters. It's relevant. It engages the brain in ways that are surprisingly deep and hard to replicate. For me, in addition to the science behind what I'm talking about, it's a tactile and physical interactive experience. You pick up a book, and if it's new, it has that crispness to the cover and the pages. You open it, and there's that smell of ink and paper. If it's a cheap book, like the ones you get from the pulp racks back in the old convenience stores, then it also has another undefinable smell that stands out. I never understood what it was, but it's there. When you get those first pages and unfold them so that you can read it, it just feels unique. Now, for me, the experience with a used book, the feeling is similar, but there's more. There's the knowledge that you're opening a book that brought pleasure to others. And when you start to turn the pages, you may catch little hints of who had it before you. I remember a book I got once. I don't even remember where I got it, but I remember when I first opened it, I caught the faint smell of pipe tobacco. And it reminded me of the tobacco my father used to occasionally smoke in his pipe. And it gave me a little bit more connection to the book. There were also, sometimes you'll find notes in books from the previous owner, something they thought they liked or a quote they wanted to remember, some little comment they put in there. So buy used books too. It's fun. So now let's get to the science. There are cognitive benefits of reading print. And let's look at those now. In his LinkedIn article, and I'm going to butcher the name and I apologize if he happens to listen to it, but in his LinkedIn article, Amram Dworkin discussed how the act of reading, especially physical books, activates visual processing and language centers in higher order thinking all at once. It's like CrossFit for your neurons, just minus the injuries. The printed page encourages active engagement. You control the pace. You control the pause. You reread. You can reflect. This boosts not only comprehension, but memory. Studies even show that reading on paper improves understanding and recall, especially for complex narratives. And again, personally, I can attest to this. While I find that I do enjoy listening to an audiobook or watching a program, I retain more and feel more of a connection with the story when I have read it in a book. Along those same lines, and maybe this is a generational thing, I have found that through most of my life, if I see a show or a movie or something on TV that I really like, I might walk away from it and ask myself if it was based on a book, and if so, I look for it and find it and try and read it. When I was working to finish my degree, I found it challenging, though, that the degree work was mostly online and digital. And while I did pick up and retain the information, I found that it was not as easy for me to do as when I have physical books in my hand. So when it was video or audio, many times I'd find myself trying to find ways to create written versions of the courseware so that I could print it out, either on paper or in the form of a PDF file, and read it so that I could retain it better. There's also a strong connection between reading and the benefits on us both emotionally and socially. Helen Thompson, in her article titled, "Is Reading Always Better for Your Brain Than Listening to Audiobooks?" she discusses how reading can help build empathy, emotional intelligence, and a theory of mind. Or, as better explained, active readers develop the ability to understand other people's perspectives and points of view. She even goes on to cite a study showing that people who read for at least 30 minutes a day, I don't think she was talking about the back of a pack of Charmin or the ingredients to your pumpkin spice Cheerios, were 20% less likely to die early. You could say that reading can, literally I suppose, add years to your life. So you know that pile of books in the corner, the one you threw the towel over and forgot it was a pile of books and now it's an end table? That could be your new fountain of youth, so get to reading. I'll put links on my website to all these studies that I have on here so that you can go and read yourself and take your own opinion away from them. But as my personal thoughts go on this, I can see how books can keep you going. I've talked about my mother a few times on this show, and I continue to do so. And my mother lived for the books she read. She was a voracious reader, and would go through countless books through the course of any given year. And she read everything: science fiction, fantasy, history, romance, whatever. She could have a conversation with anybody and hold it, simply because of everything she had read. And I've mentioned in a previous cast that she was one of the ones who instilled in me the love for reading. Because of her, I have rarely found a book that I did not gain something from or walk away liking some part of. Except Norman Mailer. Her and I both shared a common dislike for his writing. That's not to say he's a bad writer, and he's not a bad person. It's a personal choice. We just don't like his writing. But the act of reading allows us to peer into the mind of the writer, and through them, into the minds of the characters that they've created for us, or the minds of the people, in the case of nonfiction, and see how they thought, and through that build up the ability to see through the eyes of another or through their perspective. So now let's talk about the digital elephant in the room, ebooks. I have absolutely no problem with ebooks. I see their purpose. I even have several that I've read. In some cases, I have a digital version of a book that I also have a physical copy of. For example, I have several autographed books. For those of you who might not understand, those are books that are autographed by the author. Because I don't want anything to happen to those books or wear them out through repeated readings, and yes, I am one of those insane people that will read the same book over and over again over time, I'll put Post-its in them even, and write on those Post-its about a particular quote I liked or a particular idea I liked. But I won't write in the book. I'm sorry. For some reason, for me, that's sacrilege. All that said, and despite rumors that print is dead, the truth is more hidden in the details. Ebooks aren't replacing print, and thankfully, I don't think they ever will. They're coexisting, thriving, and occasionally stealing the spotlight. But if we take a moment to dive into the data, we'll see that according to the site WHOP, WHOP.com, the global ebook market is projected to reach $15.7 billion by 2029, with over 1 billion consumers worldwide by that same time. In addition to that, library ebook borrowing more than doubled from 155 million titles in 2017 to 370 million titles in 2023. And lastly, by 2030, the number of ebook readers is expected to hit somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.18 billion. Again, these numbers are worldwide. Now, I'm a literary truist. I will always pick the physical book over a digital book if it's possible. I will always appreciate the feel of a good hardbound book in my hand over the cold of a tablet. But I'm also logical in spite of what people think of me. Ebooks work and will be a permanent fixture for several reasons. Of those reasons, you have instant access. Using services similar to like Amazon, for example, here once you buy a Kindle book, you're able to read it right away. Well, depending on the book size and your connection speed, it may take you a few seconds, but the point is it's right there right now. And after that, you can read it anytime. Privacy. You're sitting on a bus. You see that 280-pound, 6'9" linebacker sitting across from you, reading his Kindle? He might be reading 50 Shades of Grey, or Twilight, or Harry Potter, or even Lady Chatterley's Lover. You never know, and that's perfect for him. Because if he were reading those actual books with the cover out there for all the world to see, everybody would know what he's reading, and he might get people snickering at him. And where's the fun in that? Here's the important one, though. Dictionaries. Be honest. We've all been in this position where you're reading a book and there's always that one word we just didn't get or we didn't understand or maybe we don't understand it in the context it was used. The nice thing about e-readers is, at least with the one I work with, if they're built right, you can just tap on the word and a little drop down will come down and it'll say, look up, and you can look it up. It's great. And it's a heck of a lot easier than trying to carry around a dictionary with you when you're packing your own library. Which leads to my next reason. And that's portability. You can carry around your books with you, all of them, and you would have to invest in some pretty hefty luggage. I mean, we're talking like Samsonite on steroids. So you can see that it would be impractical. But here, with an ebook, you can carry around as many books as you want, or is that you have memory to hold on your device. For me, I have about 60 books on my iPad, and I could hold a lot more than that. And I have a lot more that I haven't even downloaded yet. So with the portability factor, it just makes sense. And lastly, the obvious reason, well, for some of it is, they're eco-conscious. Yes, the resources that make books nowadays aren't the same as they were many, many years ago. Many newer books are printed on recycled paper or pulp that comes from specially grown trees and farms that are grown just for the purpose of making books. But still, it's better overall for the environment to use e-readers over physical books from an ecological point of view. You could say that e-books are the literary version of fast food. Only in this case, you gain intellectual weight and you rarely regret what you consumed after you've done so. Audiobook. Many of us out there know what I'm about to say. You've probably heard it many times yourself, and it has become synonymous with Audible. I hope I'm able to impersonate this voice correctly. This is Audible. And Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program. Rick Lewis's voice became the opening and closing words to so many books that I've listened to over the years. He was one of the first voices I heard when I signed up for Audible back in, I think it was 1998, when they were an independent company with a little more than 10,000 titles to their name. I remember really liking the idea of listening to books for those times I might be driving. But the early player was clunky, did not always work right, and I can recall having to reinstall it several times over the course of a year. All this to tell you that while I have alluded to many times in this episode, I am a book truist, I do see and embrace the idea of audiobooks, and I really do not see any way they could possibly be going away anytime soon. But I can also attest to the fact they have their drawbacks, and I speak from some experience here. But let's start with the good. Where once you could only find audiobooks in tape format, and trust me, that was a nightmare. I was gifted a large box set one time that was the King James Bible as read by James Earl Jones. And in the case was something like 20 tapes, each of them about 60 minutes per side. So as you can tell, the move to digital format was a major milestone and something that made audiobooks much more widely available to users and easier to use. Can you imagine being on a flight and having to negotiate a box of 20 tapes while listening to an audiobook? I mean, I'm sure that there are people who've done it, but man, what a pain that would have been, especially if you're on an airplane. But thanks to the digitizing of audiobooks and devices like iPods and Zunes, remember Zunes? I'm sure there's a few of you out there that do remember them, and similar devices, and then later on services like Audible, Spotify, and other such services out there. Audiobooks have exploded on the scene and allowed people to listen to their favorite books while doing other things, or even driving. Some of the key things that made audiobooks such a hit are that they let you read while commuting, cleaning, or even pretending to work out. The narrator can also add emotional nuance and a level of performance that print just can't replicate, sometimes humanizing the story a little bit more than just reading it. And sometimes the emotional engagement can actually be higher because of the vocal tone and pacing. And this can be true especially if the person reading it has a particularly engaging voice or presentation. If you've got a reader who actually is really animated in the process of reading the story to you, then you'll know what I mean. A good example there is I'm listening to an audiobook series called the Expeditionary Fort series by Greg Allenson. And the voice actor doing the work is R.C. Bray. And he covers so many different voices, so many different emotions, and emotes so much during the reading that I think I actually would enjoy listening to him tell the story more than picking up the books and reading them. But while convenient and fun, audiobooks are not perfect. Listening to a book is more passive than reading, since you're not actively reading the story. You're less apt to take in as much as you might while reading it. You also don't have the ability, at least not easily, to go back and reread something you might have caught or not caught or misunderstood. You absorb information at the narrator's pace, not your own. This is more important than you think, because everyone's pace and attention span is different. Even I have times where I'm listening to a book and realize that the person reading to me has gotten ahead of my train of thought, and I'll have to rewind it a hair to go back over what he just read. Comprehension and recall can be lower, especially for complex material. Personally, I find this is more true when I'm listening to something that's technical or biographical. For example, I listened to a book years ago called The Seashell on the Mountaintop by Alan Cutler. It's a wonderful book, really good. I recommend it to anybody who has interest in geology. It's about Nicholas Steno, who is considered widely to be, if not the founder, one of the founders of geology. The audiobook was great, and Grover Gardner did a tremendous job narrating. But there was so much information and so much depth that I felt I was missing out by listening to it, and I ended up buying the book and rereading it. So this is a case of your mileage may vary, but I think with certain subject matter, you may not get as much out of an audiobook as you might from a print copy or from even an ebook. Lastly is the paradox of why many people listen to them in the first place, and that's this fantasy of doing other things while you listen to the book. Granted, if you're mowing a lawn, working in the garden, putting together a model, then listening to the book, you may be fine. But multitasking while listening can and will reduce your attention and retention, depending on what you're doing. This isn't true for everyone, and there are those who can actually do 3 complex things at a time and retain everything. If you're one of those people, great. I'm jealous. But if you're listening to a book and working on a spreadsheet or writing a proposal or looking at charts, for most of us, our brains just aren't wired that way. So it doesn't work that well, and even if you swear you're one of those people that's good at multitasking, you may still miss a few things. So yes, audiobooks are great, and they're here to stay, whether you like fiction, nonfiction, fantasy, or whatever. If you're looking for the deeper technical stuff like textbooks, educational materials, I would recommend sticking with a good old printed book or even ebooks. Audiobooks are fantastic unless you're trying to learn quantum physics while you're unloading the dishwasher. Now, the cognitive differences. Print versus ebook versus audiobook. So you might be saying, Sam, this is all great, but where are you taking us? Well, funny you should ask. I'm still trying to figure that out. And that's where we are now. What are the differences? Is one better than the other when it comes to the cognitive portion? That squishy part that involves the brain and putting it all together? Here we begin to put things together. We need to read. If you're not doing so, you should be making an effort to do it more, even if it's as little as a single book every few months. It will make a difference in your life. And if you do so, remember, we talked about it here. Print books. You know those funny things we talked about earlier that sit on shelves, have paper in them and squiggly lines? In my opinion, they are the best overall. But in reality, they are the best for deep reading, comprehension, and memory. Overall, you will retain things you read in a physical book better and longer than in any other medium. They encourage reflection and rereading, allow the reader to have a stronger cognitive engagement with the material, and are ideal for complex and dense material like quantum mechanics, technical information, and the like, and are supported by multiple studies as showing better recall and understanding. With ebooks, you'll find similar comprehension to print when reading in long form, but people who tend to use e-readers have a tendency to rush through the subject matter. The screens tend to encourage skimming and scanning, which isn't always bad if you're a quick study or absorb information quickly, but it can reduce the depth of understanding if you're not careful. And on that same topic, frequent screen readers show less persistence with long texts. I'm also guilty of this, having read something one time that was a little mundane and finding myself skipping through the information. It's almost like it invites you to do that. Audiobooks. Comparable comprehension for fiction and narrative nonfiction, but as we mentioned before, not really something you want to use if you're going into the deep subjects, meaning that you might find lower comprehension for complex technical material. But on the plus side, you'll also find your emotional engagement can be higher, again, due to the narration. If you have a good reader or narrator, you may find yourself getting sucked into their excitement as they read the story to you. But then again, many people use audiobooks because they want to do things while listening to them. And this is fine if you're doing things that do not require a lot of thought. So multitasking while listening tends to reduce your retention. So think of it this way. A printed book is the brain's personal trainer. Think Hans and Franz, giving you a literary pump-up. All right, so that reference may be lost on some of my younger crowd. Google it. Ebooks are the brain's treadmill desk. And audiobooks are the brain's podcast-powered walk around the block. Just don't stop and step on that big... Oh, never mind. Okay. You can clean your shoe off later. So, in closing, reading in any form is good for us. Print, digital, audio, they all have a place in a healthy intellectual diet. Again, with one of my analogies, think of printed books as the full meal. You sit down with your book and look at the spread and dine on the text laid out before you. Your mind indulges and takes in all that info. Most of it will stick, making you intellectually satisfied. Ebooks are the protein bar. They have almost everything you need for that balanced literary diet and keep you mentally fit, but they're lacking the fiber. And audiobooks, they're the smoothies you get when you go to the gym. They're great, they go down easy, and you can have them almost anywhere, but many times they leave you feeling like something's missing. They are all different formats, each with its own different strength and weakness, yet all of them are nourishing in their own way. But, and this is the main point of all this that I'm talking about today, the real danger isn't how we read. The danger is about not reading at all. So whether you're flipping pages, tapping screens, or letting a narrator whisper sweet plot lines in your ears, keep reading. Your brain will thank you. And on that note, may your ink rebel against low battery warnings, may your coffee fuel your ebook binge until dawn, and may your regrets be as reversible as an accidental highlight on Chapter 3. Thank you for listening, everybody. I do appreciate you all. Drop me a line.